The snow came hard that morning, covering the world in a thick, unforgiving silence. Pines stood frozen like statues, their limbs drooping with heavy white weight. There were no tracks on the trail, no birdsong, no wind. Just the kind of cold that wraps itself around your bones and doesn't let go. Curled up near the base of a tree, half buried in snow, lay a boy no older than 10. His wrists were bound with rope. His jacket was thin, soaked through, and crusted with ice. His lips were blue, and his skin had the lifeless paleness of someone on the edge of freezing. Owen McAllister wasn't moving. His shallow breath steamed faintly in the air, barely enough to prove he was still alive. Next to him stood a dog, large, muscular, and unwavering. A German shepherd with eyes that didn't blink in the cold, fur dusted in white. His name was Scout, though no one in town knew that yet. He didn't leave Owen's side. He didn't bark wildly. He just watched the tree line, as if daring the forest itself to come closer. Back on the other side of the ridge, Lois Kramer stood in her kitchen, pouring coffee into a mug older than her youngest grandchild. She was 72, tough as the winters she'd survived, and lived alone since her husband passed in '09. Through her frosted window, she saw something strange, movement where there shouldn't be any. Just a flicker, just a shape. It didn't sit right with her. 15 minutes later, her boots crunched through the snow as she followed her instincts deeper into the woods behind her property. The air was sharp enough to slice skin, but she pushed forward until she heard it. A low, single bark. Not panicked, intentional. That's when she saw him. The boy, the dog, the rope. "Oh, sweet Jesus," she whispered, kneeling beside him. Her hands shook as she touched his face. It was like porcelain, cold and fragile. "Hold on, baby. I've got you." Scout watched her, still and silent. He didn't growl. He didn't move. He simply followed as Lois lifted the child into her arms and turned back toward her cabin. As she radioed for help, her voice steady but breathless, a thought crossed her mind. This boy didn't just get lost. And miles away, in a quiet cabin deeper in the forest, Walt Jensen looked out his window, squinting at the fading footprints in the snow near his shed. Footprints too small to be a man's, and too far out to be innocent. The warmth inside Lois Kramer's cabin was immediate, but Owen's body didn't respond to it. She laid him gently on the old sofa near the fireplace, wrapping him in wool blankets still warm from the dryer. Scout circled once, then lay on the floor beside the boy without making a sound. Lois knelt, brushing the snow from Owen's hair, trying not to think about how cold his skin still felt. She called emergency services, but out here on the outskirts of Jefferson Ridge, they wouldn't arrive fast. Not in this snow. Lois lit another log in the fire, muttering prayers under her breath. "Lord, keep him with us." She'd seen things in her time. Injuries, accidents, a few tragedies she'd buried in silence, but nothing like this. A child, tied up and left in the woods? No shoes, no ID, no explanation. He hadn't spoken a word, just shivered and whimpered like a scared animal. And that dog. Lois glanced at Scout again. He hadn't moved from Owen's side. His eyes were fixed on the door, as if expecting someone or something to come back for the boy. A knock startled her. 3 hard taps. Scout rose instantly, standing between the boy and the door. Lois stepped over cautiously and opened it to see Walt Jensen, bundled in a heavy canvas coat, snow melting on his shoulders. "Lois," he said, voice low, "you got a fire going? I saw a set of tracks near my shed this morning. Small ones, like a kid's. Didn't make sense, till I saw the sheriff's truck heading past." She stepped aside to let him in. Walt took one look at Owen and removed his hat. "Damn." He moved closer, then stopped when Scout let out a soft growl. Walt raised a hand slowly. "I ain't here to hurt him, buddy." Scout watched, then relaxed just enough to sit back down. Walt crouched near the boy. "He don't look local. Don't think I've ever seen him before." "He's not talking," Lois whispered. "Just whimpers and cries in his sleep." She paused. But the rope, his wrists, they were cut tight. Someone meant to keep him there. To leave him. Walt nodded grimly. He'd spent 40 winters in those woods. He knew what it meant when someone wanted to hide something out here. "I'll stay tonight," Walt said. "I don't like that the dog's still on edge." Lois didn't argue. As night fell over Jefferson Ridge, a storm thickened outside. Inside the cabin, the air was heavy, not just with cold, but with questions. And upstairs, for the first time, Owen whispered a single word in his sleep. "Donnie." The name hung in the air like smoke. Donnie. Barely more than a whisper, but sharp enough to still both Walt and Lois where they stood. Scout's ears perked immediately, his eyes moving to the staircase where Owen now lay asleep in Lois's spare room. The dog hadn't rested all night, pacing slowly at the door, alert to every creak of the old house. Now he stood completely still. Lois glanced at Walt. "You hear it too, right?" Walt nodded. "Donnie." "Yeah." "Could be a brother or a friend. Or..." He didn't finish the sentence. The look on his face was grim. In his years walking the tree lines and trapping in backcountry, Walt had learned to trust two things: the quiet of the woods and what broke it. A kid tied up and left for dead didn't just get lost. And a name whispered in sleep wasn't just a dream. If the story gave you chills, don't leave just yet. Tap like and hit subscribe to follow the truth behind Owen, Scout, and the name whispered in the dark. What's hiding in Jefferson Ridge is bigger than anyone imagined, and it's only just begun. The next morning, with the storm still battering the hills, Lois made a call to someone she hadn't spoken to in years. Ruth Langford, a retired librarian who'd kept her fingers in the town's archives even after she'd left her job. Ruth had a memory like a steel trap and a habit of remembering people who'd rather be forgotten. "Ruth," Lois said over the phone, "you ever come across a boy named Donnie in this town? Maybe connected to the McAllisters somehow?" A long pause followed. Then Ruth said quietly, "I'll check." Downstairs, Walt examined the rope they'd cut from Owen's wrists. "This knot," he muttered. "Ain't no kid tied this. That's a trucker's hitch. Tied tight. Purposeful." He turned it in his calloused hands. Whoever did this wasn't just trying to hold him, was trying to silence him. Scout sat nearby, eyes on Walt the whole time, like he knew what was being said. Just before noon, Ruth called back. Her voice was different this time. Lower. "Donnie Hale," she said. "Missing 3 years ago. 9 years old. Last seen leaving a campground near Mason Creek with his uncle. Never found." Lois gripped the phone tighter. "Uncle's name?" she asked. Ruth hesitated. "Name was Harlan Voss. Owns property out past the ridge. Near your woods." Lois turned to Walt, pale. "Voss, you know that name?" Walt's jaw tightened. "Yeah," he said. "He keeps to himself now, but back then, I heard he got questioned when Donnie disappeared. No charges stuck." The room went cold again, colder than the snow outside. Scout stood up and walked to the front door. He let out a low, warning growl. Someone was out there. The snowfall had slowed by mid-afternoon, but the weight of unease inside the cabin only thickened. Walt stood at the front door, staring down at something the snow hadn't managed to erase. Footprints. Fresh ones. Just 2 or 3, half filled with powder. They stopped a few feet from the porch as if whoever made them had stood there, watching, then turned back. Lois stepped beside him, eyes narrowing. "They weren't there this morning," she whispered. Scout let out a sharp bark and stood beside Walt, his hackles rising. The prints weren't big, maybe size 10 boots, but wide at the toe and deep. Heavy steps. Whoever it was had come close and left in silence. "He's checking on him," Walt muttered. "Whoever left that boy out there isn't done." Inside, Owen stirred. Upstairs, he tossed under the quilt, a faint whimper escaping his throat. Lois rushed to his side while Walt went for the rifle hanging above the fireplace. He hadn't fired it in years, but something told him he might need to. Owen's eyes fluttered open, his gaze unfocused, lips trembling. "Is it night?" he asked faintly. "Is it night yet?" Lois blinked. "No, sweetheart, it's still day. You're safe now." But Owen shook his head slowly. "He only comes at night," he whispered. He said, I talk in my sleep. He doesn't like that. Lois felt a chill roll down her back. That wasn't just fear in the boy's voice. That was memory. Raw and unfiltered. Scout barked again, this time toward the back of the house. Walt moved quietly to the kitchen window and peeked out. "Back fence," he said. "Someone's walking the ridge." Lois followed, her heart pounding. Through the trees, half blurred by snow and distance, a man stood motionless in the tree line. Not moving, just watching. He didn't run when Walt spotted him. He didn't hide. He just turned and walked back into the woods. "That was Harlan Voss," Walt said flatly. "I'd bet my damn truck on it." Lois pressed a hand to her mouth. "Why is he back now? After all this time?" Walt's eyes stayed on the woods. "Because something's not buried as deep as he thought." And behind them, Owen whispered again from his bed. This time not a name, just a question spoken like a warning. "Did he bring the box?" The wind had changed by evening. It wasn't just colder, it carried something sharper, like the edge of a blade. Walt stood on the porch again, shotgun in hand, scanning the darkening treeline. The sun was slipping behind the hills, casting long shadows across the snow. Scout stood rigid beside him, his ears twitching at every sound. There was no more barking, only waiting. Inside, Lois sat at the edge of Owen's bed, a flashlight resting on the nightstand beside a glass of warm milk. Owen hadn't spoken in nearly an hour, but his eyes were open, watching the flicker of firelight dance across the ceiling. "Owen," she said gently, "what did you mean when you asked about the box?" He hesitated, then turned his head slowly toward her. "He said if I talked, he'd put me in the box too." Lois's breath caught. "Who?" she asked. "Who said that?" Owen didn't answer right away. His hands clutched the blanket tightly. "The man with the red coat. The one with the deer antlers on the wall." His voice dropped to a whisper. "He kept Donnie in the box." That name again, Donnie. The boy from 3 years ago. And now the box. Walt stepped inside the room just in time to hear the last part. "I know that place," Walt said quietly. Lois turned to him, eyes wide. "Up past Miller's Hollow. There's an old hunting shack. Belonged to a man named Voss's brother-in-law. Had a rack of deer antlers above the fireplace. Burned in half by lightning in '98. He looked at Lois. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Lois stood up, her voice steady. "I think we've got one night before he tries to come back. And I don't plan on letting him take this boy again." Owen sat up slightly, shaking. "He comes at night. He always comes when it's dark." Scout moved closer to the boy's side again, his eyes locked on the window. They boarded up the back door before sunset. Walt placed a lantern near every window, and Lois loaded the fireplace with enough wood to keep them warm till dawn. The cabin felt like a trap now, too quiet, too exposed. Outside, snow continued to fall, erasing footprints and hiding intentions. And somewhere past the ridge, under a sky turning black, Harlan Voss stood in the doorway of that half-collapsed shack and opened a long wooden box with rusted hinges. The night fell like a curtain, fast and absolute. The snow had stopped, but the cold remained, seeping through every crack in the cabin walls. Walt sat near the front window with his shotgun across his lap, eyes scanning the tree line. Lois paced the kitchen, hands trembling only slightly as she checked the locks for the third time. Owen slept restlessly upstairs, and Scout hadn't left his side all evening. Lois lit a second oil lamp and placed it on the windowsill. "He's out there," she said quietly. "I can feel it." Walt didn't argue. He could feel it too. Something was off. The stillness outside wasn't peaceful. It was waiting. Scout barked once from upstairs, sharp and sudden. Lois flinched. "That was a warning," Walt muttered, rising to his feet. "He's out there, and Scout knows it." "Do you think Walt and Lois can protect Owen before it's too late? Drop your theory about the box in the comments and hit like if that scene gave you chills." They both hurried up the stairs. Owen was sitting up in bed, pale and wide-eyed. "The smoke," he said. "I smell the smoke again." Scout stood at the bedroom door, his nose to the bottom of it, tail rigid. Lois sniffed the air and caught it. Faint, acrid, burning wood and something older. Not the fireplace. "He's trying to draw us out," Walt said. "Smoke means he's lit something close." Walt pulled open the bedroom window just a crack, ignoring the cold. The smell hit harder now. "Back hill," he said. "He's burning something by the old logging path." Lois looked to Owen. "Is it the shack? The place with the box?" Owen nodded, tears in his eyes. He burned things there before. When Donnie screamed, his voice cracked. Lois's heart clenched, but she stayed calm. "We're not going anywhere tonight," she said. "He wants us to panic, wants us to come to him." Walt looked back out into the trees. "I say we flip the script." He reached into the closet, pulling out a long, dusty duffel bag. Inside was a flare gun, 2 flashlights, and an old map of the ridge. "We wait till dawn, then we go." That night, no one slept. Owen kept waking in short bursts, terrified by every creak. Scout refused to lie down, standing guard by the bedroom door like a soldier. Downstairs, Walt and Lois took turns watching the windows, waiting for a shadow to move. And just before sunrise, Walt spotted it. A figure crouched by the fence, barely visible in the dim blue light. Watching, waiting. Walt lowered the curtain slowly, not saying a word. Lois stood beside him, her breath shallow, clutching the poker from the fireplace. "You saw him again?" she asked, though the look in his eyes already told her the answer. Walt nodded. "Same coat, same stance, just standing there, still as a stump. He ain't hiding anymore." Upstairs, Scout let out a low growl. Not loud, not panicked, just enough to confirm what Walt had seen. Owen sat on the edge of the bed, his knees pulled up to his chest. His face was pale, his eyes red from lack of sleep. "He waits," the boy said softly. "He waits until you're too tired to fight. That's when he comes." Lois knelt down and took his hand. "He won't get to you, Owen. Not while we're here." Walt moved to the back room and pulled the flare gun from the duffel bag. "We're not gonna wait around for him to pick his moment. I say we take it to him. First light." He paused. "And we're not going unarmed." He handed Lois a heavy flashlight and tucked a small hunting knife into his belt. "He wants to finish what he started 3 years ago. With Donnie. With Owen. I say we don't let him." But Owen shook his head. "He doesn't live in that shack anymore," he said suddenly. "He only uses it to hide things. Bad things. He said he lives under the ridge now. In the cold place." Walt turned sharply. "Under the ridge? What does that mean?" Owen looked down. "He digs. He has tunnels. He takes people down where no one can hear them." His voice was no louder than a breath. Lois felt sick. The idea of that man burrowing into the frozen earth, dragging children into darkness. It chilled her deeper than the winter ever could. "We need to end this," she said, "before he disappears again." Walt nodded. "At first light, we go to that shack. If there's anything there, we find it. If he's there, we end it." The silence between them was thick, heavy with fear and finality. Outside, the sky began to shift from black to gray. Dawn was coming, and just beyond the tree line, Harlan Voss stood alone in the snow, his breath fogging the air, holding something wrapped in cloth. A small object, wooden, burnt, waiting to be buried again. The snow crunched under Walt's boots as he led the way through the tree line. The sky was a pale gray, washed in the weak light of early morning. Behind him, Lois moved carefully, flashlight in hand. Scout trotted silently at her side, alert to every sound. Owen stayed back at the cabin, tucked into blankets, still too weak to walk far, but his eyes had followed them out the door, wide with unspoken fear. They didn't speak. The air between the trees felt heavier the closer they got to the ridge. Walt guided them along an old hunting trail, half buried in snow but still familiar. He hadn't walked this path in years, not since the last time someone had vanished near Miller's Hollow. "There," he said, pointing through the trees. The burned-out shack stood like a broken tooth, its walls half collapsed, the roof blackened by time and weather. Lois stepped through the doorway first. The smell hit her instantly. Ash, old rot, something faintly metallic. Scout stopped just inside the entrance, sniffing the air, then moved toward the far wall. There, beneath a pile of broken wood, was a narrow trapdoor. "This wasn't here before," Walt muttered. He dropped to one knee and brushed the snow away. Rusted hinges, recently disturbed earth. He opened it slowly. A cold wave of air rose up from below, wet, stale, and heavy. A crude tunnel stretched down into the ground, barely wide enough for a man to crawl through. Flashlight beams caught marks on the walls, scratches. Fingernail deep. Lois covered her mouth. "Dear God." Walt turned to her. "I'm going in." Lois hesitated, then nodded. "I'll stay with Scout. Yell if you find anything." Walt lowered himself into the tunnel, flashlight clenched between his teeth. The earth pressed in around him, and the deeper he went, the colder it became. The tunnel turned, then widened slightly into a chamber no bigger than a closet. And in the center of it, wrapped in a child's blue jacket, was a small wooden box. Burnt edges, metal clasp broken. Walt reached for it slowly, heart pounding. Inside were photographs, torn, faded, faces of children, names scribbled on the back. One of them said, Donnie, age 9. Another, Emmett, age 7. And then a third, Owen, keep quiet. Chapter 9, The Things We Bury. Walt stood in the center of the forest clearing, the burned box still clutched in his gloved hands. Snow fell in soft sheets around him, but the chill that ran through his spine had nothing a coat could fix. He looked again at the last photo. Owen's face, younger, scribbled with the words, "Keep quiet." The implication was sickening. Not just fear, control. Lois watched from the shack's doorway, arms wrapped tightly around her coat. Scout stayed pressed to her side, eyes never leaving the edge of the woods. "We have to go back," she said finally. "Owen needs to know. He needs to understand it wasn't his fault." Walt nodded, jaw tight. "We show him everything. Let him speak if he wants. And then we call the sheriff. No more hiding this." The wind howled through the trees, but there was something else behind it. A sound deeper and heavier than the forest itself. Movement, far off but coming. Back at the cabin, Owen sat up when the door creaked open. His eyes immediately found the box in Walt's arms. "That's it," he said before anyone said a word. "That's what he kept under the bed. I wasn't supposed to touch it." Lois sat beside him. "You're safe now, Owen. But we need to ask. Do you remember the other boys? Donnie? Emmett?" Owen hesitated, eyes clouding with a familiar darkness. "Donnie cried a lot," he whispered. "He tried to talk to me, but Harlan didn't like that. He said if we remembered each other, people would start asking questions." A tear rolled down his cheek. "He told me no one was looking, that even if I ran, I'd just disappear like the rest." Walt placed the box on the table. "You didn't disappear. Not this time." He turned to Lois. "I'll take this straight to Sheriff Rowley. If Harlan's still out there, we need backup." Lois nodded, but her gaze shifted to the window. Outside, just at the edge of the woods, a figure stood, still, watching. Lois didn't speak. She simply walked to the door and locked it, turning off the porch light. "He knows," she said quietly. "He knows we found the box." Walt grabbed his coat and rifle. "Then let him come. This time, we're not the ones running." And in the tree line, Harlan Voss stepped back into the shadow of the forest, his breath fogging in the cold night air. The game he'd played for years was falling apart. But he had one more move. And this time, he wasn't coming for the boy. He was coming for anyone who got in his way. The wind had picked up by the time Sheriff Rowley arrived. His truck struggled up the snowy incline, headlights cutting through the morning haze. Walt flagged him down at the gate, box in hand. "We've got something you'll want to see," he said. The sheriff's expression turned from curiosity to grim certainty as he flipped through the photographs. Inside the cabin, Owen sat near the fireplace, Scout curled at his feet. Lois knelt beside him, wiping soot from his hands with a warm cloth. He hadn't said much since the night before, but he was calm now, eyes focused on the flames like he was watching something be burned away, something he didn't need to carry anymore. "We have enough to charge him," Rowley said. "Multiple counts. Kidnapping. Abuse. If we find remains tied to those names." His voice trailed off. They all knew what that meant. Walt nodded. "He's still out there. He was watching us just hours ago. He knows we're coming." They didn't wait. Walt, Sheriff Rowley, and 2 deputies headed out toward the shack and beyond, tracking where Scout led them. The snow had covered most of Harlan's prints, but Scout knew the scent. He moved fast, weaving through trees like he'd done it 100 times. The trail led to a cave hidden beneath a frozen outcrop, a low, wide crack in the earth. "This is what Owen meant," Walt muttered. "The cold place." They entered carefully, flashlights cutting through the dark. Inside, they found the remnants. Sleeping bags, children's clothes, tools, old lanterns. And at the back, a second box. It was filled with watches, labeled, cleaned, preserved like souvenirs. Then came a noise, stones shifting. Sheriff Rowley raised his weapon. "Hands up, Harlan." The shadows moved, and there he was, gaunt and expressionless, holding a rifle. "You don't understand," Harlan said calmly. "I gave them peace. The world forgot them. I didn't." His voice was flat, rehearsed. "You're done," Walt snapped. "There's nothing left to hide." Harlan raised the gun. A single bark echoed through the cave. Scout had slipped in behind them. The distraction was enough. One shot rang out. Harlan collapsed. It was over. Days later, the snow began to melt. Families arrived to retrieve the remains of their sons. Quiet vigils were held. Ruth Langford read each name aloud in the town square, her voice cracking only once. Lois held Owen's hand through it all. He didn't cry. He just listened, his small fingers gripping hers like an anchor. One morning, as the spring sun warmed the hills, Owen stepped outside with Scout at his side. He walked to the edge of the woods, paused, then turned back toward the cabin. This time, he wasn't afraid. He was going home. If the story moved you, give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more powerful true stories. Your support helps us keep sharing voices that deserve to be heard. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss the next one.